We're rolling.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast.
The Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 72, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Josh Koth.
And I'm Jack Haas.
And here at the REI Rookies, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
This week we thought we'd focus on something a little different. Everybody probably is familiar with the author Seth Godin, but there is a video that's been swirling around the internet and Facebook called Icarus, and I think the video is actually called How to Actually Use Your Free Will, Seth Godin for Goalcast. So we are going to share a link in the show notes, but to simplify it, you head over to bit.ly/Seth Icarus, and that'll take you right to the YouTube video. And we really encourage you to pause this right now and go watch that video so that you have some context.
It's about 4.5 minutes-ish, and it's really it was one of those videos I watched, and I was like, whoa, I got to share this. So we thought it'd make a great podcast episode and just kind of have some discussions around the concepts in the video. So take a minute, go watch the video, and we'll pause right now. We'll wait for you. Oh, back already? Cool. What'd you think?
So it's always interesting to me when something really clicks for something, and this one really clicked for you. What really stood out to you regarding this video, Josh?
Well, I've always liked Seth Godin, and I had one of his books called Purple Cow, which from a marketing perspective is a great book. It's all about differentiating yourself in the marketplace and how it's better to be a little bit different than it is just to be a little bit better than your competitors. And I've never highlighted a book or I was taking pictures of phrases in the book and paragraphs highlighting, dog-earing the corners. I mean, and I've recommended that book hundreds of times to people. So something about Seth Godin, I always just love his insight and wisdom. And so whenever I see a video of his, it kind of catches my eye. And this one I was kind of jaw-dropping, eye-bulging kind of video because that Icarus Myth, right, we've all heard about. It's basically a cautionary tale of don't have too much hubris, don't get too cocky, don't set your goals too high, because if you do, you're going to get burned and you're going to die, right? That's basically what we were taught ever since I first heard that myth or the fable, because fables are stories designed to teach you a lesson, right? And I always just assumed that that's what that was for and just kind of whatever, never thought more of it. But then he talks about in the video how that in fairly recent times was altered. And, if you watch the video, which you did, obviously you paused our podcast here and went and watched the full 5 minutes, you'd know that they changed the myth in fairly recent times and left out the part. It took out the part where he said, also don't fly too low, don't set your goals too low because the condensation in the sea will get you and you'll sink.
Yeah, the mist would wetten the feathers, right?
Right.
It's like make that what's trying to lift you off the ground. I suppose it's making you heavy and you're going to drown.
Yep. So I thought that was interesting. That not so much that the myth still is a fine myth and a fine fable, but what's interesting is why would somebody take that out, right? Why? What would they feel was necessary to remove that portion? Why do they want to limit, the public's goals? What are the reasons that they would do that? I thought that was so interesting. So as a real estate investor, you think, what did that trigger as you watch that from a real estate investing perspective or just, an entrepreneurship perspective? For me, it was, you really don't set your goals too low. And I always kind of ignored the don't set them too high anyways. I thought that's why I just kind of dismissed the Icarus Myth normally. But now, I can see both sides of it. But I just thought it was very telling that other part was removed. And why would someone do that? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've talked about this before where we're always cautioned, especially in real estate, and we've all heard it, whether real estate is risky or we're always cautioned by those type of investment activities, especially at the beginning. So
mostly from outside people, right?
Right. People who don't get it, people who don't understand it. And, I thought what was really interesting about this video is that, and I'm sure there's a much larger aspect to this story. And in fact, there's a second video that I'm meaning to go back and listen to. And I guess it's just an audio on YouTube as well, where he kind of goes into quite a bit more detail regarding this Icarus Myth. He does a full keynote on it. I thought it was interesting that he does go into the school system and talking about how that was set up.
Yeah, that's the second major part of the video that was kind of an eye-opener. Basically, he claims, and I always take things with a grain of salt, but basically that the public school system was put in place because of a lack of compliant factory workers. So it's kind of designed to just produce a compliant factory worker. And when you think about it, that's pretty true. He says, you make enough, you'll work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and you'll make enough money to buy the things you want. You don't love your job, but it'll be fine. And you live long enough, you make enough money to accumulate some things, and then you die. There's really not much to achieve beyond that if you follow that system. And that's, when you think about it, the school, the problems that we have with the school system as investors, right? It doesn't teach you basic financial literacy, right? How do you, even just how to invest, compound interest. I remember all these things were revelations when I read What's the Richest Man in Babylon? Is that the name of the book?
Yeah, Richest Man in Babylon.
I read that when I was like 24 or something, and I was like, I've never been taught this stuff, the power of compounding interest, and why aren't they teaching this stuff in school? As passive income, as you read Rich Dad Poor Dad and the Cash Flow Quadrant and all these real estate specific investing books, you realize there's an entire path out there that you can follow that's completely different from what you're trained to do. And nothing in the public school system teaches you this or even presents it as an option. In fact, when I went and spoke at a public school, they did, luckily, one school in our town brings in entrepreneurs once in a while. And so they're kind of letting it sneak in a little bit. And, I was teaching some stuff on real estate to these kids, and they were kind of like, their minds were kind of blown by the fact that there's something else out there other than just going to get a job. And, it took me till we were in our 40s to kind of get red-pilled, as we call it, and realize that what was out there. And I feel like I almost kind of got gypped a little. If I had been taught this stuff from birth and, in public school, I would have had a much more of a head start as far as, actually producing generational changing wealth for myself and my family.
Yeah, but, it is a situation, too, though, that the teachers in those school systems, we went through some training not too long ago. It's a part of, they don't know what they don't know. Right. What are they going to teach if they're not even aware of it themselves?
Right.
They're the product of that same school system.
Yeah, and it is very, self-fulfilling, or it's just a continuous loop where, you produce those compliant workers, and those workers go on to work at businesses that need more compliant workers. They have kids that go to these schools and produce more compliant workers, and it just kind of feeds itself. The system feeds itself. And when you kind of break out of that, you're almost seen as kind of a rebel. Like, well, I'm going to not follow that path. I'm going to have my own business. I'm going to invest. I'm going to work for passive income rather than working for a big retirement account balance that I'm going to eventually hope to produce income in my retirement with. It's just, you get a lot of naysaying and negative reactions when you kind of tell people that you're going to be doing this, because it's different from what the majority of people do. So it is kind of like being red-pilled, being woke, in quotes, as we call it. And you're going against what you've been taught from kindergarten on.
Yeah, it does put things into perspective, especially with what we've been taught. Because can you imagine if we would have done, I did a lot of book studies and different things in high school. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if we had the opportunity to do a book study or discussion on Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Cash Flow Quadrant, mm-hmm. Richest Man in Babylon, any of these books that in the real estate investing world would be considered classic literature.
Or Think and Grow Rich, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's another one. I mean, to me, that should be required reading, and I'm going to make my kids read all those books, and I'm trying to train them. Luckily, they're young enough where I can still hopefully have an impact there, and just through seeing it in our family, they'll see it as normal. Passive income generation is going to be normal to them.
So, with the training that we've gotten from public school, college, what have you, I think it's really a pretty strong argument that it has helped us establish a set of limiting beliefs. I almost call it brainwashing.
Right. We're getting all conspiracy theory here now.
Yeah.
That's funny because it's Seth Godin, even in the video, says he's not a conspiracy theorist, but then he goes on to talk about the public school system designed to produce compliant workers. And, basically you just have to decide what's right for your path. I mean, if that's what you're happy doing and you're satisfied with that, there's nothing wrong with that. I just think that I want all the options available to me to be presented to me so I can make my own decision. And, I think that's how I approach most issues. I just want the information. But I feel like by what they choose to put in the curriculum, they're limiting that just naturally by eliminating some of those passive income, entrepreneurial type education pieces that they could be including that really, are going to be more helpful in changing your financial trajectory than, a lot of things that I learned. I remember making a pillow in the shape of a surfboard in 8th grade, I think, not that that's not a useful skill, but it would have been nice if they dedicated at least as much to financial literacy as they did to making a surfboard pillow.
Did it float?
I don't think so.
So, this is one of those things. And this wasn't too long ago that I saw another video that kind of relates to what we're talking about. And it was a study on children and toddlers and the way they learn and the actions that they manifest. It was demonstrating that we are actually functioning at a genius level at that age, because we're consuming so much information. And it isn't until they start to enter a structured school system mm-hmm. that IQ starts to slow way down, like the development there.
Or you just start to be told, you can't do that, that's not the way you do this. Those limiting beliefs are sort of introduced, whereas they weren't before. That is kind of, a kid thinks everything's possible, right? They think they can fly off the top of a building, then in the interest of safety, you're there saying, don't do that, that's not safe, don't do that. And that's one thing I've tried to watch myself too, is like when I'm interacting with my kids, not to tell them negative things all the time or what they can't do. I always try to frame it in a positive way if possible, like, how about try this? Or maybe, how do you think that could work? Rather than, don't do that, quit doing that, don't do that. Because I think all that negativity has kind of a cumulative effect, and they start to almost question themselves when they have ideas of things to try. And you really want to encourage that imagination and that thinking that anything's possible. You want to keep that alive as long as you can.
Believe it or not, and while you were talking about that, I did a quick Google search. There was a UCLA study or survey not too long ago that showed that an average 1-year-old will hear the word no 400 times a day.
Yep, I totally believe that.
So it's just in our programming to limit everybody.
Yeah, and it's because you want to protect them when they're headed for the street. No, stop! You don't want them running out in the middle of the street to get run over. So it's sort of preservation. It's safety. It's all those things we're designed to do as parents, and it just becomes habit. And then you get annoyed by their behavior as well, and you want them to instantly comply. which young children are not really capable of doing. So you just end up getting into that mode where you're just yelling no all the time, and eventually they become less and less willing to think that anything's possible. And you really want to try to get that back or maintain that state where they think things are possible for as long as you can.
But this kind of brings me to another concept, and I'm going to admit this heavily, that I have a problem with negative self-talk. It is a ongoing issue that it just dogs me all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of people. So you really have to watch the internal narrative in your head, what you're telling yourself, because a lot of that programming that we went through the public school system, and we're I don't want to say a victim, but we're a product of our upbringing as well. And we heard no how many hundred times a day, and we went through the public school system, and it produced what we are to this day. And I think that's why it took us, at least in our two particular cases, took us so long to break out of that standard 9 to 5, work till 65, accumulate large retirement, that path. It took us a long time to break out of that path. And you have to kind of be fed the material that teaches you something else is different. So you really have to watch internally what you're saying to yourself and what you think is possible, and how many times do you say, I can never pull that off, or I can never do that. If you see somebody else having success, and try to say instead, well, how could I do that, or why couldn't I do that? And it's really a muscle. You have to train yourself to just think that way. And I'm a big believer that you can have a lot of say over how you feel about things. You have a lot more influence over that than you probably would like to admit. Or some people really kind of get into a victim mentality, and they just think, I'm not saying actual chemical depression. We're not talking about that, but I think you can move the needle a lot more than you initially thought. And people in general can move the needle as far as their own outlook on things and your mood. You can decide when you're in a particular situation how you're going to look at it. And if you choose to look at it positively and you make that choice consistently, you're going to be a lot happier overall and achieve a lot more, I would argue.
Well, and it's really like, I hate to describe it like an alcoholic or drug or what have you. You just some days you get into such a negative talk spiral that you can't see beyond it. It's something that's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and that's one of the reasons why I found it so important to be around like-minded people. That's why I'm involved in so many networking organizations, doing one-on-ones with different people throughout the week, just to be around those people that also have that positive outlook. That's becoming a pretty key aspect just to stay in the right mindset.
Exactly. I mean, just understand there's things you can control and things you can't, and really take charge of the things you can control and try not to worry so much about the things you can't, and just decide to look at them as positively as you can. And if you do that long enough and consistently enough, I think you'll see a change in your actual mood and your actual outlook. I think people underestimate their ability to change their own mood and their own outlook on things. So that's kind of what I got out of this video. A lot of free will, limiting beliefs, negative self-talk, about the school system and how it's designed to produce compliant factory workers, all very eye-opening stuff. So if you didn't pause this podcast and go watch the video, definitely go watch it. Go watch his keynote talking about the Icarus, what is called the Icarus effect, or
it's
well, we'll have the link in the show notes as well to the keynote and the video that triggered this whole discussion. And definitely a great author too. He's got lots of great books on marketing and just a very wise gentleman. So look out, anything from Seth Godin. I'm very much a fan of.
Yeah, and what's really good too is that if you manage to listen to any of his audiobooks, or at least the one that I listened to recently called The Dip, he self-narrates that.
Oh, yeah. Great.
So, well, with that, as always, if you like what you hear, or if you have any suggestions, please send us an email at info@reiRookies.com.
Hit us up on Facebook or Twitter at REIRookies. And if you have some money sitting on the sidelines you'd like to put to work, head over to investwithvpp.com.
Remember, we always look forward to you subscribing to this podcast, and we ask you to please rate and review. It really helps other rookie investors find the show. And remember, get off the bench
and get into the game. We'll see you next time.